Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. For a long time, it's been pretty well established that the U.S. military is not the fighting force of one political side or another. It serves the American people as a whole. They serve the Constitution and for what it stands for. They, in large part, remain politically neutral. But if President Trump has his way, that tradition of political neutrality would end, and it would become his own personal attack force, one he could deploy at his leisure to fight his political enemies and to quell any dissent. Unlike during his first term, where he had active duty generals like James Mattis and John Kelly to rein in his authoritarian leanings, this time around he has no such impediments. When he realized competent military advisors would rein him in, he instead replaced them with a bunch of yes men and sycophants who would never deem to stop the great Donald Trump and what he wanted to use the military for. Former Fox News personality and current Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth certainly isn't going to say no to him when he says Portland, Oregon is a war zone, or Chicago needs to have war declared on it, or that all of his political enemies are the enemy within and must use military force to fight them. As a wannabe authoritarian, he's already managed to control the intelligence community, the justice system, and the military is the only thing standing between him and full authoritarian control. And it seems like there's going to come a time very soon where the military is going to have to choose between their oath to the people of the United States and the Constitution and to the president himself. I think it's important to remember, and I think it's important for the president and his people to remember, that as Judge Karen Immergut, a conservative Trump judge, wrote last week in her blocking of Trump's attempt to send troops to Portland, that we are a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. The U.S. military is not the president's personal military. They are the American people's military. While yes, it's true the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, that does not bestow upon him the authority to send them against his own personal enemies. And when the few judges within the judicial system he does not directly control go against his desires, he says that they are just shielding the, quote, large and growing movement of left-wing terrorism. It's this narrative that those on the left are actually terroristic individuals who go against the fundamentals of the United States. So it's not that he's deploying the military to fight his personal political enemies. He's sending them out to fight terrorism. There's nothing more American than fighting the terrorists. The scary part of framing it this way is that when he does it, it will then give license to these military officers to fire upon unarmed civilians because they're actually terrorists, when the reality is that the worst that they are political dissenters, and not loving and falling in line with the regime is not illegal, at least not yet. So when, and not if, the order comes down from the high man to shoot their own people, will these soldiers do it without question? I unfortunately think that the reality is that some absolutely will. The president, in their eyes, is the absolute authority. So if he says fire, they will fire, regardless of who it is, whether they're a real foreign combatant or just a so-called leftist. Despite the oath to the Constitution, they will do as their commander-in-chief commands, even if it goes against everything else they know to be right. Head of U.S. Strategic Command, Air Force General John Hyden was asked back in 2017, well, what if the president gave you an illegal order? He said, quote, he'd tell me what to do, and if it's illegal, guess what's going to happen? I'm going to say, Mr. President, that's illegal. And guess what he's going to do? He's going to say, well, what would be legal? And we'll come up with options of a mix of capabilities to respond to whatever the situation is, and that way it works. It's not that complicated. But that was 2017, back before the Supreme Court granted the president basically absolute power and immunity to do whatever he wants. In 2025, an illegal order would probably be met with, do it anyway, and unfortunately, I think many would. And those who refuse to follow it would likely be relieved of duty and replaced with someone who would. Yet another example of the president saying that the laws are only an impediment if he allows them to be. And a president that only follows the laws he feels like and ignores them when it convenes him. It's a dangerous thing to have. I think that virtually guarantees conflict and bloodshed. And unfortunately, That may be the only way out of this situation. If the president orders the military to do something so abhorrent, so obviously wrong, and against everything the military stands for, that the people will no longer be able to ignore how bad things have gone and how far they've slid into authoritarianism and, frankly, fascism. And of course, as usual, there'll be those on the right who are justifying it and rationalizing it and seeing it as actually not what it looks like. But it will be exactly what it looks like. And maybe then and only then the majority will feel that we've gone too far and that this cannot continue. When they see live on TV or streamed online, live, active military personnel firing upon their own citizens, that they'll say, no, this is wrong. We can't let this happen. It shouldn't have to get to that point. It shouldn't have to go that far. But it feels like that's the only way at this point to get through certain people's heads. Things have gone beyond too far, and it's time to stop. Quote General Hayton again. If you execute an unlawful order, you'll go to jail. You could go to jail for the rest of your life. In the past, that could have been enough of a deterrent to executing an order these soldiers knew to be illegal, that there was the threat of jail. But we have to take into account the fact we're living in a time where many believe that if the president says it, it is not illegal and it's fine. But we live in a nation where laws matter and they are not optional. They're not to be adhered to unless they're inconvenient or the president says just do it. I think if there's anywhere we want a sense of accountability and adherence strictly to the law and to the Constitution, it is the U.S. military. If we, the common people, cannot trust that the military is there to protect us and are not working against us in the employ of a wannabe dictator, we are truly lost. And if it comes down to it, if we truly are about to see the U.S. military take up arms against its own people, where are the militant Second Amendment guys? The ones that said, I need my guns to protect myself against a tyrannical government. That is the tyrannical government they supposedly need those guns to protect against. Can we count on them? I feel like we can't. But the fact that we're even having this conversation at all is concerning. We should not be having to even think about what would we do if the military started shooting unarmed civilians. The notion that we the people should fear our own military is deeply concerning. And I think even the most uninformed person can't keep denying the fact that our current president is absolutely setting himself up as an authoritarian leader who is bent on imposing his will on the nation and is likely to do everything he can not only to eliminate his perceived enemies, but to remain in power for as long as possible, far beyond what is allowed to him in his current position. Donald Trump thinks of himself as a king and wants to be treated as such, and is absolutely not above using violence and using the military to keep his authoritarian rule over the populace. We are going to have to be prepared to see real violence break out at the mass protests that we are going to see in a few weeks. The one protesting the president's new authoritarian role, the so-called No Kings protest. And I think it's there where the real test is going to be, where the fighting men and women of our country are going to have to, once and for all, show if they are loyal to the Constitution and people of the United States, or if they're loyal only to Donald Trump, the man. Now, I admit the fact that it's going to take the spilling of American blood on American soil by American soldiers to be the line in the sand is incredibly distasteful to, but it seems like we are at a point where there can be no other. Donald Trump and his enablers have pushed the nation to a point where it is now an inevitability, and we have to collectively figure out what we're going to do after it happens. Some are saying that would be the beginning of a second American Civil War. I think that's a little hyperbolic, but something will definitely happen. My only hope, and I suppose the nation's only hope, is that the higher-ups in the military who are not within the Trump cult will not allow military to fall under authoritarian rule. Under no circumstances can the president be allowed to make the U.S. military into his personal military. That much I am sure of. And that will be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off, another slice of news.